Now that I've got to restart myself here, we started with this framework that describes our total cost curves. So we've got our total fixed costs and our total total costs, which is sort of a reflection of our total variable costs. The total cost is the sum of these two. And then we described our marginal cost curves as deriving from these. So we have an average fixed cost curve, which is constantly decreasing. We have an average variable cost curve. Average variable cost. Then we have an average total cost, which would be the sum of the average fixed and the average variable. So it starts out a good bit different, but then asymptotically these two approach one another. And then on top of this, we build, we find really a marginal cost curve. And among other qualities, we recognize that the marginal cost curve cuts through each of these two average cost curves at its bottom. Now this is all short run stuff. In the long run, what we observe is the fact that the variables that we have held fixed in the short run for these models are no longer fixed, such that there is no longer a total fixed cost curve. There is just the marginal cost curves and the total cost curves. Okay? There's no difference between fixed and variable, it's just total. So then in the long run, we might choose a particular size of plant. Okay. Now this is the average total cost curve in this short run, and the marginal cost curve in that short run will cut through the bottom of this average total cost curve at its bottom. But if we change the size of plant, if we build a bigger factory, it could be the case that with a larger factory, we have a short average total cost curve here and the marginal cost curve here. That is the bottom point of this second short average total cost curve might be lower than the bottom point of this short run cost curve because we have varied the size of plant. We have done something about our factory to make it bigger. Right? We've captured economies of scale. And then some point later on, we could have another short run average total cost curve where the size of the plant is even bigger. Right? And it could be in that case that we've achieved this economies of scale, making the plant even bigger, trying to capture larger quantities per plant actually has made the production of that good or service less efficient. So then we ask ourselves, well then okay, from this we can deduce the long run average total cost curve. The long run average total cost curve. And the long run average total cost curve is going to envelop all of the short run average total cost curves. So it's like there's an envelope theorem out there that if you're mathy, you can go and look up. But the long run average total cost curve is going to be an envelope that sort of captures the outline of these. It sort of goes like this. The long run average total cost curve. Notice that it's not touching at the bottom of this short run average total cost curve, it's hitting here. Here, at the very lowest short run cost curve, there will be a coincidence between the two, right? And over here, again, it's not at the very bottom. In a way, the fact that it's not hitting at the bottom indicates to the manager that they're not performing at the most efficient that they can. So all of these are sort of as if theories, which is to say that managers don't actually have all of this data. They're not comparing all of this data in real time in the real world. Instead, they're experimenting. So if there's 5 firms that are competing in a particular industry, one firm chooses this size plant, the second firm chooses this size plant, the third firm chooses this size plant, this firm will capture the most profits. This firm and this firm will have a harder time discerning, right, should I get bigger or smaller? They're gonna have to experiment with that too. Because it turns out that their average costs are similar. So how can you know whether you're too big or too small? How would a manager know whether they were too big or too small in this context? They might have a hard time telling. The first thing to do is to tweak it at the margin. Right? You get a little bit smaller, and then you realize, oh, that's the direction I need to be moving in. But it's really hard to tell. Both of these 2 firms might die in competition. Questions? We can draw a more basic long run average total cost curve like this. Draw it like this. What we can say about this is that over the range where we're building a bigger plant makes you more efficient, we can say over that range that there are increasing returns to scale. And then at some point, it becomes obvious that increasing the size of your firm or your plant starts to cost you more per average unit. Here we have decreasing returns to scale. And then over some range, it's quite common that that differences amongst different sizes of plants don't make that big of a difference. So between here and here, it doesn't matter what size plant you have. All of them are equally efficient. So then we have constant returns to scale. Some of you will recall that when we did intermediate macro, the constant returns to scale assumption is imposed upon the Cobb-Douglas production function, right? But that's not always true. Sometimes there are increasing returns to scale, sometimes there are decreasing returns to scale. That assumption makes the math easier, but it gives away the fact that a lot of those macro models are based upon an assumption that the economy is operating in a perfectly efficient way or a perfectly competitive manner. Why might a firm be experiencing increasing returns to scale? Amongst other reasons, as you build a bigger plant, you might be able to hire more workers, and each of those workers might be able to specialize in part of the tasks that need to be done within the firm. So if one worker is responsible for answering the phone, taking the order, making the pizza, folding the box, cutting up the pizza, right, putting the pizza in the box, and then delivering the pizza, that person is not doing much specialization. You might think of Mookie and Do the Right Thing. Anybody ever see Do the Right Thing? No? No? Never, old Spike Lee film, one of his earliest Spike Lee films. Fantastic movie. All right, so but if you're able to hire a phone person, a box folder, right, a pizza maker, a pizza cutter, and each person is able to specialize, you get faster when you're specializing in something. You find new ways of doing things. You figure out little tricks that help to get the job done quicker. So we end up with something like assembly lines. Not always is it efficient to have an assembly line. Two, costs can be lower in the long run. You can make more efficient, you can make use of more efficient equipment when you're in a large scale situation. So if you're farming on just 1 acre, it doesn't make sense to have a combine, but if you've got thousands of acres, then the combine becomes worthwhile. If you have a large output, then you can take advantage of lower cost of inputs, right? If you're a seller of inputs into a production process, and you can sell a larger quantity, right, then you're likely to sell at a slight discount, right? This is why we go to Costco, because you can buy in bulk. So having a larger size firm means that you can buy in bulk the inputs into your production process. You can have slightly more leverage in the bargaining process for inputs into production. And then you can also take advantage of things that would otherwise be wasted. So if you're running a slaughterhouse and you slaughter 5 cows a day, then you're just going to hose it off at the end of the day and clean the place up. But if you're slaughtering thousands of cows, then you will most likely capture the blood, right, dry it out to create blood meal, which is a good fertilizer. So there's these opportunities to take advantage of byproducts. It's incredible. There's a book called The Travels of a T-Shirt and the Global Economy. And in this book, the author talks about how when producing cotton for T-shirts, cotton is produced at such a large scale today that we don't just make use of the cotton, but we actually separate out the seeds and make cottonseed oil. And that cottonseed oil is an input into other production processes. The husks of the seeds are even captured and incorporated into animal feed. The stalks of the cotton plants are reused for some other part of the process, et cetera, et cetera. Back in the day when oil was a new product, when people were first extracting crude oil from the ground, they were using that oil and refining it to make kerosene primarily. The byproducts from that production process were not considered worth capturing. There was no application for those byproducts. So those byproducts just went into large pools sitting next to the refinery. And how many of you have seen There Will Be Blood? Right? There's these big pools of byproducts sitting next to the oil refinery. How many ever hear of the Cuyahoga River in Ohio? What happened to the Cuyahoga? The river caught on fire. Right? The river caught on fire because there were so many oil byproducts floating on top of the river at one point that they caught on fire. Now today, oil refining and then extraction is done in such a clean way, not necessarily because they care about the environment, but because they're doing it at a scale at which it becomes worthwhile to recapture those byproducts and then sell them in other production processes. So achieving scale can actually be one of the most important ways to clean up the environment, by achieving an economy of scale. Right? This is true in many situations. Once the firm achieves an optimal size plant, if it were to increase output, then it enters into diseconomies of scale because costs start rising. One of the diseconomies of scale could be simply the diseconomy of management. In other words, if the manager has too many things that the manager is trying to manage, the manager might mismanage some of the things it's managing. It might not have the information necessary to keep track of everything. How many people do you know that have too many things on their plate? And then they forget something. They drop the ball on something. You want to maintain a scale of activity that does not overtax the burden of the manager. Okay. If the demand for output from a particular industry is so great, so here we're only talking about costs. We haven't talked about the demand from consumers. If the demand from consumers from products from a particular industry is larger than, if it's out here somewhere, quantity demanded, right? Then what will happen is that it won't be able to be, the wants of the consumers will not be able to be satisfied by one producer. So instead, we will typically observe multiple different firms in that industry. However, if the demand curve for a particular kind of product intersects with the average total cost curve of a firm, the long run average total cost curve of a firm, in the range of constant returns to scale, or even in increasing returns to scale, if it goes through here or here, we will often observe only one firm in that industry. Because to introduce a second firm would mean that that second firm has to enter in at a higher cost point. Am I making sense to you? If that second firm enters in and has to enter in at a higher cost point, then it won't be able to compete with the incumbent firm. Right? So then we call that kind of a firm a natural monopoly. It's a monopolist, but it's a natural monopolist because the efficiencies of scale, the economies of scale in that particular kind of production pair well with, right, there only being a single firm in that industry. Can anybody think of a natural monopoly? An example of a natural monopoly. Yeah.
Do we get like chain grocery stores?
There's so much competition in groceries. Yeah.
Could you say like Facebook or Google?
Facebook and Google are, but they're competitors. And there are competitors to Facebook. Part of the thing with Facebook is that the price to the consumer is zero.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of what helps to protect it as a monopoly. But we're getting something for free, so why do we care? We're going to talk more about that in the future. Utilities within a particular region are often monopolistic. Right? There's one electric company in Muncie. That's because for there to be a second electric company, they would have to have a duplication of all of the infrastructure that already exists for distributing electricity. Now that might make our supply of electricity more redundant, which could be something that we want, right? It could be, oh yeah, even if company A power goes out, there's a blackout, maybe company B will still be able to produce electricity that we can use. Okay, well then maybe we want that. But it's more often the case that a utility like that is somewhat monopolistic. At least the distributive side of it. We've seen in other places where production of electricity can be provided by multiple independent companies and then sold to the distribution network. That's what they do in Texas. But they also had a huge blackout a couple of years in Texas during a huge freeze and really screwed things up. Was that a good situation or a bad situation? People tried to take that one situation and make all different kinds of economic conclusions based upon it. But in general, it seems that that approach in Texas is efficient for Texans. Not that we care anything about them. Texans. Okay, so now it could be that the firm that is experiencing, a demand out here somewhere where there are decreasing returns to scale. It could be that that particular firm simply on its own chooses to break itself up into multiple firms, each of which is operating at a lower cost point. We should actually expect to see that. So this is what's the opposite of a merger, right? This integration of an industry. We actually do observe that from time to time, where a company will spin off one of its divisions, right? And it'll become two companies. Similarly, a firm might be engaged in too many different kinds of production processes. Now, we understand that the long-run average total cost curve, right, for different kinds of industries will be shaped differently. One of the problems with Soviet planning was that they assumed that every single firm, by getting larger, would be achieving greater economies of scale. They neglected the fact that some industries have decreasing returns to scale after a certain point. And so they assume that the bigger the firm that you have, right, and they place managers over huge plants, the more efficient they would become. But they were wrong. They're massively inefficient in a large variety of ways. If there are very low economies of scale, then there will be many, many, many small firms. Now, we're going to take this and move towards a pure competition model. And in a pure competition model, the market, from a consumer's point of view, consists of those firms from which a consumer can purchase a well-defined product. And from a seller's point of view, consists of those buyers to whom he can sell a well-defined product. So pure competition means that there are both buyers and sellers have a particular product in mind. And there's very little differentiation amongst the qualities of those products. So I've mentioned this before, we call that homogeneity of products. There are many buyers, there are many sellers in this market. So there are many dimensions of market structure. The first is the number and size distribution of sellers. In some markets, there are many, many sellers. Others, there are relatively few sellers. So again, restaurants typically have many, many small sellers. The second dimension would be the extent to which interdependency is felt among the sellers. So in some markets, one seller doesn't feel any relationship with other sellers. So if farmer X is growing spinach, he doesn't care what farmer Y is doing. However, in the automobile market, there's a lot of interdependence. Right? Daimler Chrysler will make decisions based upon what Ford is doing. And sometimes they'll even hire spies to go work in the other people's factories to find out what's going on, or in their design facilities to find out what's going on. If Ford produces a low-cost pickup truck, which they were trying to do, did you guys read about this at all? There's an attempt. Yeah, what do you know about it?
Ford Maverick?
Yeah, the Maverick, right?
Yeah. Them trying to develop like a hybrid truck where you get great gas mileage with a smaller bed and then wrap it in like a $20,000 price tag.
Yeah, it's 20 grand for a Ford pickup, right? Is it really gonna be a Ford pickup though?
Well, I think anymore, when you look at the automotive industry, they're now going towards the quarter ton pickup, which if you do a quarter ton pickup, then it kind of defeats the purpose of having a pickup. Because you can't haul anything really over 4,000, 3.5, 4,000 pounds.
Right, so maybe it's not worthwhile, or maybe it's sort of like encroaching on the market for the Honda Ridgeline.
It's fantastic for that.
They tested for that?
It's fantastic to compete with the Ridgeline. And
Oh, yeah,
like anyone in here, like if you were just hauling your bike or like a canoe or something like that, perfect.
yeah,
But I can't haul like a camper.
couldn't haul a camper with it.
It'd have to be one of those half lean ones that only weigh like 1,200 pounds.
Yeah. What's the point of that? Okay, good. You know what I got time for that. Third dimension is the nature of differences and similarities of the products. So differences, similarities of products. So again, this is sort of the homogeneous versus heterogeneous distinction between products. So homogeneous product, buyers don't really have a preference with respect to the product. So you go to the grocery store to buy some apples, and you want to buy Honeycrisp apples, of course, but you don't care where they came from. You don't care which farm they came from. Whereas if you're going to buy ice cream, you might have a preferred brand of ice cream. For example, Tillamook chocolate is very, very good. Or the Talenti black raspberry chocolate chip is banging. I've got a pretty specific preferences when it comes to ice cream because I've done a lot of experimentation. We also have to have really high preferences when it comes to toothpaste. How many of you are using the same brand of toothpaste that you've been using for at least 5 years? Right? No, you change up. Do you experiment? How do you find out a different toothpaste? I'm scared to try a different toothpaste. No, you don't care? You're not scared? No. Yeah, y'all are still dating. You're using other people's toothpaste. That's what's happening. Somebody else happens to have a toothpaste and you really need some toothpaste right now for a very specific reason. And so you're willing to experiment with someone else's toothpaste. Maybe even somebody else's toothbrush. My God, that's nasty. Okay. But usually by the time we're on our own, we've chosen our brand of toothpaste and our flavor of toothpaste, and we kind of stick with it. Same with fragrances, right? Or deodorants. Right? You sort of settle into a particular product, and that's your thing. The knowledge held by buyers and sellers. So knowledge becomes an important issue about the buyer, about the prices involved in transactions. So there might be widely held knowledge about a particular product that everybody can know the price. So you can know the spot price for an ounce of gold. It's easy to look up. It's publicly known. It's out there. So finding the price of gold is really easy to know. Finding the price of a particular house is really, really hard to do. There's all different kinds of things involved in the way a particular house is priced, including the quality of the schools, right? The amenities on the street, all different kinds of things affect, and actually some of you were there Wednesday night when Dr. Hicks talked about this stuff. Lots of things factor into the value of a home. And so the housing market is very imperfect, in part because the houses are very heterogeneous. And the fifth element is entry and exit conditions. So is it easy to enter into the market? Is it easy to start up a new firm in a particular market? Do you need to get a license to participate in this market? Do you need to have the health inspector come through and look at your facilities in this market? Or can you just basically go out and start selling whatever it is you have, whatever it is you do? Are there high fixed costs to participating in this market? If there are high fixed costs, then will you ever be able to recover those fixed costs by producing at a large scale, or are you always going to be in the range of increasing returns to scale, but never actually achieving constant returns to scale? Because there's already a lot of other competitors in the market who've already gone through those fixed costs. So these dimensions of market structure show the state of markets that are very complex. So in order to think through markets, economists have taken these various different dimensions and simplified them so that we end up with what we call the perfect or atomistic competition model. The perfect competition model. This is also sometimes called the atomistic model. Atomistic meaning finding the smallest element possible. Right? And in this model, in the perfect competition model, there are many, many buyers and sellers. So that behavior by any one particular buyer or seller goes completely unnoticed by everyone else. So if you go out and you sell 20 ounces of gold, right? Nobody's going to notice, because in terms of the large market for gold, you're a small player and you're not moving the market. You're not gonna move the market. So no one they can't move the market, at least not the price. The products are homogeneous. All the same thing. The buyers and sellers have perfect information. And I've covered this before, but it isn't bad to repeat this stuff. Okay, so that means that the information costs are zero. That's important because oftentimes what we observe in markets is actually the consequence of transactions costs of some kind or other, right? In economics, there's one of three answers. It depends, at the margin, or transactions costs. Okay, that's how most economists will answer most questions. But in building this model, we assume away all transactions costs. Right? And then 4, perfect entry and exit. So in those cases, a new firm can enter the market at any point in time, and it's costless to do so. The consequence, the sum of all this is that all these firms are price takers, not price makers. They take the market price as given. They have no say over the price. Okay. Also, each of these firms will be profit maximizers. All that any of these firms will be seeking is to maximize their profits. It's the only thing they really want to do. In the real world, firms have other motivations, but we are going to assume that they seek to maximize profits in particular. Okay. How do you maximize your profits? Well, we want to show this for the atomistic firm and in the short run. To max profits, there's 2 rules. A firm will not produce, don't produce anything unless total revenue is greater than or equal to total variable costs. If you can't cover your total variable costs with your revenues, you might as well shut down. Now, this is the same exact thing as saying your average revenue has to be greater than or equal to your average variable costs. Because average revenue is just total revenue divided by quantity, total variable costs divided by quantity gives you average variable costs. The same statement, really. In the long run, all costs are variable. Okay, if your total revenue is less than your total variable costs, you're just going to shut down. You're not going to produce anything at all. The second rule is that the firm will find it profitable to expand output whenever marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. If marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, then the firm could capture more revenue, and each unit of revenue will be greater than its costs by producing more. So as long as marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, you're going to produce more. You're going to stop producing more when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Perfection. The change in revenue for producing one additional unit is equal to the change in revenue for producing that unit, is equal to cost, then at that point, we're the happiest we can possibly be. We've achieved the perfect competition level, maximizing profits. So for example, I think these are the same numbers I used the other day. Maybe a little bit different. For example, if I have set up something like this, right? I have a quantity of production, and then the price that good can earn in the marketplace. Then I'll find my total revenue is equal to the quantity that I produce times the price of that good, so my total revenue is this. My marginal revenue will be equal to the additional revenue captured from each unit. And then what I'm going to do is look at my marginal costs and my profits. The marginal cost of the first unit is 5, and then 6, and then 9, and then 10. Right? My change in profit is positive so long as the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost. But to go beyond this, we would almost certainly enter into a region where the marginal cost is greater than the marginal revenue, and so the firm will stop producing. Which is to say, all in all, that the firm will choose to produce where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That is the profit maximizing level of production. This should all be reviewed. Questions? No? So to restate these two main rules, right, basically that total revenue divided by quantity is greater than or equal to total variable cost divided by quantity, which is that average revenue is greater than average variable cost. That's sort of the shutdown condition. If that isn't true, shut it down. The second rule is basically aim for marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So you do this again. Here we're going to show a larger expression of this. So here we have a table that is showing the total fixed costs, the total variable costs, the total costs, and the marginal costs of producing a particular good. And we notice that the fixed costs stay constant, as fixed costs should. You notice that total variable costs are increasing. That total costs are also increasing because they're basically just the sum of the fixed costs and the total variable costs. And then marginal costs are also increasing, at least after a certain point. They hit a bottom here, but then they start to increase again. And here we have the price, which is brought in exogenously from the overall market. This stuff is observed by the individual firm. This is generated by market conditions. This is not endogenous to the firm. And we calculate total revenue based upon basically price times quantity. P times Q is total revenue. And then we calculate marginal revenue. What's interesting about this is when the firm takes the price as being brought in exogenously from the market, marginal revenue is also constant. And actually, if I wanted to calculate average revenue, it would also be constant at 50. And then we try to find profit. And we want to maximize our profit. And we find that profit is maximized right here where marginal cost, right, is closest to marginal revenue. Somewhere between 45 and 60 marginal cost, here we're going to find our profit maximizing level of output. So we're going to choose to produce, what is it? We're going to choose to produce 7 or we're going to choose to produce 8. We can choose to produce 6, 7, or 8, but it looks like if we choose 6, we can do better by choosing 7. We're not finding the exact perfect quantity here. We're not producing half of anything. We're producing whole units. So it's helpful to see that the firm chooses to produce where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, or at least as close as possibly can be determined. That 50 for the price, that came out of the whole market. Why is the price 50? Because given all of the buyers and all the sellers interacting in the market, at the margin there is at least one exchange that is obtaining at a price close to 50 that is capturing surpluses both for the marginal buyer and for the marginal seller. So this price of 50, I guess I'm almost out of time. Am I out of time? You got like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. This price of 50 is carried over into the decision of the representative firm. We're going to use like a lowercase p and a lowercase q. Talk about the decisions that are being made by the individual firm. And that individual firm is going to face its marginal cost curve and its average total cost curve. This price that obtains in the overall market becomes the price that is observed by the individual firm. And it is essentially the demand curve that is faced by the individual firm. It's also the marginal revenue curve for that individual firm, and it's also the average revenue curve for that individual firm. They're all the same. This firm is going to profit maximize where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. And it will capture profits that are the difference between average revenue and average cost. Average total cost in particular. And this region will be the profits captured by this firm. Now, if there is a firm in a market that is capturing prices like this, what do we expect to happen? If there is a firm that is earning profits, what do we expect to happen? If there is a firm that is observed to be capturing profits, we expect another firm to enter. They'll also compete. And the more other firms enter, what happens? Prices are forced down. So the way that that shows up for the individual firm, with a marginal cost curve and some sort of an average total cost curve, is that as prices fall competitively in the market, then the profit captured by that particular firm decreases. And we expect that there will be entry into the market until the price that obtains is equal to the absolute bottom of the average total cost curve. And we're also assuming that all firms have the same cost curves, that each firm is representative of the whole. At that point, what happens to profits? They ain't none. At least economic profits are zero, right? There may be accounting profits, but that's just nonsense. What matters is whether there's economic profits. And the assumption here is that in a perfectly competitive market, firms can enter and exit such that, and firms also know enough about each other's products and each other's mechanisms for production that all of them have the same cost curves, and that the market will achieve perfect efficiency, the perfect number of firms, all of them producing at the bottom of their average total cost curve. We've got the most efficient market we possibly can. Right. That's the result of the perfectly competitive model. It's important to remember that, right, as the price changes, the profits of the firm are whittled away, and that the capturing of profits by a particular firm is what incentivizes the entry of another firm. What if we don't know about a firm's profits? Then nobody knows to enter. So it might be the case that a firm that is capturing large profits in an industry might try to hide its profits. Would that be beneficial to the rest of us? Not really. Okay. How do we prevent that from happening? This kind of hidden profits, right, can generate inefficiencies in the market as well. Okay, that's enough for today. I posted the homework. I will see you on Monday, and you'll get some other stuff.
When's that homework due?